I am NetMoverSitan, and it looks like that with the inclusion of Edgar, part of the southern branch of Zwei Association's Section 1, things became more complicated. We continue with Chapter 40, To Bring Justice! Where Moses, Ezra, Vesper, Edgar, and his robot dog Rang, in power armor mode, were against Capo Isabel and her 20 Sedators. All because Moses decided that she made a deal with Edgar, choosing to honor his deal to stay legitimate, than to continue working for the fun. As for Moses, she basically told Vesper, "Go kick some I won't stop you this time. Him up." Vesper had been waiting for this. Moses understood that when fighting against Edgar, Vesper was holding back that time. He wouldn't do the same with those that it's personal with. They also have the ammo that would have given the thumb a more effective means of fighting back harder against Vesper and Ezra. Edgar focused on Capo Isabel, her brass knuckles against his steel fists. The others would deal with the Sedators. Moses told Ezra that they'd take on 3 of them and leave the rest for, Vesper. Ezra understood. Vesper was probably thinking, "Yeah, about time to do this." Moses can support them with 3 forms of breath. The red sword construct wouldn't do much against a single Sedato, so she decided to use a violet whip construct to lash at 2 Sedatos heading towards Ezra, all to cause mental damage to them, as they wrapped around them to slow them down, with both mental and physical pain. Moses more or less ordered Ezra to do what she had to. She understood, even though Moses didn't tell her exactly what to do. Ezra swung her hammer at the Sedatos that couldn't get away, crushing the cranium of one, but missing with the other. They retaliated with the buttstock of their rifle, which resulted in a stalemate between them, dragging the fight along. Even Vesper was struggling to deliver fatal blows on his targets, even though he'd prefer them dead. Thankfully, Moses had a plan. She called for the marksman to shoot anywhere and whoever he desired. He even used the thumb's bullets. Ooh, the irony. Thankfully, he was able to imbue them with his highlight reel-inducing power and didn't hit those that weren't thumb-affiliated. It didn't matter whether they dodged or not. The bullets found their targets regardless. This paralyzed them. The one that got hit last was Capo Isabel. Edgar found out what had got him. They were helpless. And those that didn't overcome what they dealt with, Edgar watched them die. As for the rest, Edgar would deal with them his way. As for the marksman of the mist, Moses will be taking him. Edgar had a bitter smile as he punched Capo Isabel's head off. Edgar noted that the bullet holes were the same kind as the ones left on his dead fixers. Moses considered the situation. The Zwei fixers at the workshop weren't doing the bidding of the fun. That was because of the marksman. Although her primary mission was to capture distortions, preserving their lives came first. Moses told Edgar that he could have the marksmen in exchange for getting off their backs. Edgar was unsure where she stood, acting for a single goal, without a clear morality, one who would stop at nothing to reach where she wanted to go. Edgar, she's just being what she needs to be in order to survive in the city. You're the one who can't see in terms other than black and white. The marksman was not too happy with being sold out. Moses only needed to take care of the task that Diaz gave her. The marksman was a liability overall. Then her artificial arm indicated that Han Hee-jun had tried to contact her for some time. Edgar thought that communications were busted within District 12. Certainly in the nest. He had mixed feelings about one that had technology that could call for reinforcements. And what did Han Hee-jun say to Moses? He basically told her that he'd been watching what had happened from them being chased by the sweepers, their deal with the Thumb, and their conflicts with the marksman and Edgar. Right up to slaughtering the Thumb in that area. And then he was practically relaying an indirect order from Diaz to capture the marksman of the mist and kill Edgar. All with a line where it was implied that Lady Diaz, she basically said she'd have the aftermath cleaned up. That she wanted them to secure the marksman of the mist. You really know how to cause a mess for them to clear up. Because things were going so well after the Thumb were all killed in that area, and Edgar was more or less satisfied. At this point, I'd think my arrangement with Diaz would be more trouble than it's worth. Moses, on the other hand, she didn't really have that much of a choice. Moses said to herself that she was going to kill that man for forcing her into another impossible situation. And I can't blame her. I suspect that she would have killed him long ago if she was sure that she could get away with it. In fact, if she had an opportunity to leave him for dead, she'd probably do that, as she's not the one that'll kill him. But then again, she doesn't have to pull his posterior out of the pressure cooker. Regardless, Edgar took objection to this, and Moses ordered Ezra to stop him. She was barely able to stop his fist, using her imperfect psychopaths. Edgar questioned what was up with this. Was she after money? No, he didn't think so. It was about beliefs. Twisted beliefs that affect what was in her wake. A half-hearted sense of justice. Sparing his life while taking down the thumb, but it's broken when it drags her down. Or was it too soft to break in the first place? Seeing them as a band of scum. Actually, it's you who don't see, never mind understand, how the city works. It's not a place where a black and white morality is a common one. Although Moses didn't dispute what he said, her beliefs were based around atonement, self-consolation. That's all that mattered to her. Which is why she let out the pale breath, which covered Edgar with turquoise blue powder made from her life force. Ezra was outraged by this personal betrayal. As for Moses, she basically said, Edgar, tell me something I don't know. But I won't kill you for the sake of my scummy beliefs. Edgar called Farang that it was time to bring justice, which activated a glow that increased the armor's power output to maximum. He pushed Ezra away and focused on the marksman of the mist. He was sprinting on all fours, but the pale blue powder was slowing him down. The more he ran, the more he was slowed down by it, until it was ground to a near halt. Yes. His power armor was not that useful in this case. The marksman was relieved that they hadn't forsaken him. He came down and ran towards them. Ezra was still angry at this personal betrayal of Moses. Using the pale breath, she would not forgive it as easily as last time. Vesper sheathed his weapons and walked to them, but Edgar refused to stop. Somehow, the speed had caught up with him, and he quickly smashed the lens, killing him. Edgar then also knocked the sword away quickly with a backhand as Vesper tried to draw it, then struck the former taboo hunter in the chest with his left fist. Edgar told Moses that it was time to bring justice. He wouldn't let her get away without punishment for what had happened. Yes, this was new. A possible side effect of the pale breath, where stored momentum was released when his movement was halted and couldn't be halted anymore. But they couldn't do anything about this at that distance. Moses questioned his definition of justice, which involved killing people left and right. Bringing justice by delivering death to whoever seems guilty to him? Well, he does. He doesn't deny that is his definition of justice, so he's a cross between the Punisher and Judge Dredd? He grabbed her by the neck, gripping her hard enough to make getting out of it impossible, but not hard enough to crush her windpipe. Ezra wasn't even able to make him flinch. Moses went over his actions. The marksman of the mist is dead. The Thumb's forces in that local area are taken down. He knows who they are. What reasoning does he have left? Butchering fixers out of spite? Edgar questioned the wisdom of her running her mouth at him when he could crush her windpipe at any time. Did she believe that would save her life? Moses was giving him the situation for what it was, as what he was doing was no better than what a syndicate thug would do. Rang told him something that convinced Edgar to let her go, probably something about him tempering his violent behavior, that it was not justice. He told them that he'd remember them, that he'd be in charge of their every action within that nest. I'm guessing he's letting them off with a warning. Largely because they're still alive. Now we have Chapter 41. Hotel Larierre. After getting the equivalent of being let off with a warning by Edgar, the Grade 1 fixer from the Zwei Association South Section 1 Serious Crimes Division, after Diaz ordered Moses and the others to take him down and retrieve the marksman of the mist, who was killed by Edgar despite being slowed down by the pale breath, while Ezra was shouting at Moses in response to this betrayal, and Moses narrowly avoided getting her windpipe crushed. She contacted Han Hee-jun and told him that they failed to secure the marksman of the mist. He saw it as a shame, but it's fine. She should continue her work and look for shelter, as it was getting late. They don't want a repeat of what happened last time in the night of the back streets. Moses doubted that it was a shame at all, based on the lack of ill will or reproach, possibly due to understanding the elements that he had no control over, such as Edgar. It was just a minor setback to him and Diaz. As for the fixers affiliated to Moses, they weren't feeling so good. Ezra was still upset, Vesper was feeling powerless, and Uriah, the workshop maester in the teddy bear, was still incapacitated. They headed back to their van, as they needed that to retrieve distortions. Moses told Ezra that she had to take the option with the highest chance of success. Ezra asked if she was going to use the blue breath every time. Moses wasn't. Only when it was necessary, when all other options were unlikely to work. Ezra still objected to that, and Moses countered that none of them had any other means to stop Edgar. Ezra was weak. She might have psychoments, but she can't fully control that power. Vesper was thinking, I'm not getting involved in this conversation between them. Then Moses told Vesper that their goal wasn't strength or vengeance. It was about finding and retrieving distortions. Then Vesper said that it was for her personal satisfaction. Moses confirmed this. When they got to their van, it was thankfully intact. Clearly the sweepers ignored the distortions already contained within. They decided to head back on the road, as the power problems of the van had somehow solved themselves. They could continue their mission. They saw the sun setting, and they needed a place to stay the night in. They didn't want to use the house that the Thumb took over, in case more of them headed there to investigate what had happened to them. For all they knew, it could have been a bunch of fixers slaughtering them, but it was unclear who they were. Better mystery than a certain threat coming for them from all sides. Thankfully, DS provided for them well. With the money they had, they could book a 7-star hotel if they wanted to, assuming that such a hotel was still operating. Neither Ezra nor Vesper had any idea of where they wanted to stay in. So Moses wanted Ezra to hand over a map of L Corp's nest. She did so. It had a list of restaurants, accommodations, and other things. It's navigation that would be the problem. If she didn't have her arm that she could use to determine their current location and work that out based on where that is on the map. They are far from the center of the nest, where the closer they are to that, the higher quality facilities there would be. Then they found a 4-star hotel called the Hotel Larierre, which was 30 minutes from their location. The wing might have fallen, but commerce and provision of services don't stop because of that. Not even fixers or syndicates stop their work, or move unless it's truly hopeless. When the client's money runs out, the fixers leave. When the money runs out for the syndicate's clients, the syndicates throw them out into the back streets, possibly with some mutilation. Certainly with those affiliated with the fund. Might makes right is the mentality that is stronger than ever within District 12. Certainly after that wing had fallen. Where they'd leave if they saw that the nest was doomed. Well, it's only a matter of time considering what point in the story this was. However, it's not always possible to migrate to another nest, as each nest deals with that differently. Some are likely to be tighter than Australia during the Spanish flu pandemic of the 20th century. So there's no chance of getting in those nests. Where for some, the back streets will be their new home. They'll not adapt to it easily, and even there it will be difficult to find a decent area to settle in. On the way to the hotel, they dealt with small-time syndicates, those that attempted to rob them, those that tried to intimidate them. Both were given either violent deaths, or they were just outran. After a short drive, they then arrived at the Hotel Larierre. Vesper questioned if it was still in business. Ezra told him that they'd find out once they got in. After they parked, they headed inside. They were greeted by Roots, the manager of that hotel, asking if they were there to check in or assault them. Ooh, do they get attacked a lot? Clearly they do, considering that their hotel has a contract with an office employing multiple Grade 1 fixers, suggesting that they stay out of trouble. Thankfully, Moses made it clear that they were there to check in. Root asked for Moses' ID, and she handed it over. And based on the fixer ID handed over, Root noted that she'd come a long way from the north, requiring an expensive warp train journey. Yeah, it's not just expensive in... not just expensive in considering what we know about it. How it really works. And Root hopes that Moses hadn't brought trouble. That's as serious as the distance that they travelled. Well, not that she knows of, Root. Moses asked why Root is so inquisitive about their guest business. Apparently, it's because the nest is rather chaotic. Ezra asked if the rates included breakfast. Root confirmed that it was, although it's not as good as before. They serve meat pies and tomato juice. Ezra was nervous about this. Yeah, let's hope that the meat pies and tomato juice aren't from District 23, as we know that let's just say it could be false advertising. Either that or it's unclear where the meat and tomatoes come from, if you know what I mean. Root then requested the IDs of the others to check each person within the party. Well, they needed to be thorough. Ezra and Vesper did so. Ezra wasn't considered that bad, but when Vesper was revealed to be a grade 1, that was a problem, as the manager's pen stopped for a moment. Moses suspected that he might have lied about a contract with an office. Moses told him that they won't cause any trouble. They'd leave as soon as morning broke. Then someone spoke from behind the group. They said that Hotel Larierre had quite a legacy. It was even partnered with Hana Association. It might not guarantee immediate safety, but it can screw over the lives of any fixers that reveal themselves to be loose cannons. Basically, if a fixer causes injury or damage without a good reason there, the Hana Association will look into it and punish those that commit such acts, depending on the events and how severe the case was. Punishment includes penalty points that can result in demotions, and at worst, disqualification. Yeah, the Black Silence incurred quite a few of those, and appeared to be only just short of disqualification, or even outright death. Whew. That's considering the rampage. And likely taking his personal loss into account. Well, this voice appeared to be from Rusk, the operator of Rusk's office. So Root was not lying. They really do have a contract with a fixer office. Rusk and his grade 1 fixers were all staying in that hotel. He told them to entrust their weapons to him. Vesper and Ezra were hesitant to hand their weapons over. Ezra's were in the dimensional bag, and Vesper's were on display. Well, you can hardly miss them. Basically, Rusk office would keep them safe during their stay, and if they don't hand their weapons over to this cloakroom service, they can look for alternative accommodation. And this is even though they can still cause some problems unarmed. This is to minimize risks. Root asked how many rooms they'd like. Moses required 3 of them. And Root handed them keys to room 501, 502, and 519. And their staff would guide them to a unique room as part of a special service that isn't part of any other hotels. Well, that's quite a statement. 3 suites for 1 night, which would be a total of 2.45 million So approximately 800,000 a person. And this was likely taking into account how expensive it was to hire a fixer office and to maintain contact with the Hunter Association. Yeah, a fixer office made up of grade 1s. Moses agreed to the terms and conditions, and Ezra paid for their rooms with the cash in her bag, and they handed in their weapons. Yeah, Vesper unbuckled his belt, but not before threatening violence if Rusk leaves so much as a scratch on his blade. Rusk asked, he said, rather, that was up to him. Ezra did not approve of how Baby B spoke to Rusk, asking him to take good care of their weapons as they're precious to them. Moses asked if she can keep her smoking pipe, mentioning that she'd smoke outside if they prefer her to. Root asked Rusk to examine the pipe to ensure that it wasn't lethal, asking if Moses will allow them to inspect it. She handed it to him, and he saw it as expensive looking, but it wasn't lethal upon examination. Well, not unless you count the nicotine and tar infused tobacco, which can have an adverse effect to even those taking in the second-hand smoke. Well, it was handed to her regardless. And the hotel clerk led them to the elevator. Clearly they don't know about Psychomint and what she can do with that pipe. Otherwise, they wouldn't have let her have it on her. Ezra and Vesper were in room 501 and 502, respectively, while Moses was in room 519. Breakfast was served between 6 and 9, and then Moses asked if there were many guests. And according to the hotel clerk, many guests have been checking in to stay there long term, which was understandable to Moses as it's safer than a common residence of the nest, even though it's more expensive than the monthly rent of a backstreets dwelling to stay in that hotel for 1 night. Moses was unsure about the increase in guest numbers as the hotel didn't seem to be that well populated. Other than them, none were around. The hotel clerk said that it was because it was late evening. Then they arrived at room 519, one of the proudest rooms that the hotel had to offer. She slowly walked into that room. Then she was hit by the thick stench of blood, worse than the residence that the thumb killed its residents over to shelter in. She had the door slammed in her face as she was about to leave, with the hotel clerk saying, "Enjoy your stay, milady." She readied herself as she saw 20 people facing the wall, blood vessels extended from the back of their necks, converging into one spot, which had a woman sitting on a leather sofa connected to those veins. Moses recognized what she was seeing for what she was, a blood fiend, a vampiric kind of distortion, although this one is clearly more subtle than most of them, as she clearly didn't want to catch attention from combat-ready fixers. Moses had clearly encountered at least one of her kind before this occasion. Moses was greeted by Larierre herself, the owner of the hotel, seeing it as no coincidence that she arrived there in front of her. Moses was infuriated by this. A blood fiend in the hotel they randomly picked from the map. She was unsure if Han Hee-jun planned that from the start after calculating her route, with that hotel that close to their location, or if it was just an unfortunate chain of events. Yeah, an unfortunate chain of events that led them there. Skepticism was strong regarding him due to his track record as a psychopath that was ready to lie to others if it achieved the desired results. This form of distortion was a stereotypical one, a more vampiric one. Comparing it to the merfolk, in this case the distortion was based around hunger, a psychological thirst. They ranged from urban legends to stars of the city. Yeah, remembering the blood-red night. Moses readied her pipe, forming a red sword construct. This fascinated Larierre. The blood imbued in it was what made it crimson. The blood fiend made it dissipate and asked if she could take a moment to listen to what she had to say, readying a red chair for Moses to sit on. Yeah, she made one appear. Moses took the seat. Apparently, after the white nights and dark days, it's all changed. Although Moses, well, it was unclear if it was just the red smoke or her psychoment in general that was useless against this blood fiend. But it was clear that Larierre did not want her dead. Or dinner. Now we have Chapter 42, Bloodfiends. Now, let's remind ourselves of Elena, the blood-red knight. She was a Star of the City grade bloodfiend that made her mark a few years ago. Or more specifically, a few years before Moses arrived at the Hotel Larierre. She randomly killed people from the back streets and the nest. Yeah, I suspect that she rose as quickly as she did because she killed people in the nests. The back streets, well, let's just say if she stuck to killing in the back streets, she wouldn't have risen as quickly. She operated largely around the eastern and northern parts of the city. Yeah. Which explains how Moses dealt with blood fiends, other than the obvious reason. Her victims were found without their internal organs, and not just those that were found dead. Some of them were reanimated. She rose through the threat levels until she was a Star of the City. Multiple associations and offices were united in the hunt for her. Moses' office was a part of that hunt, although she didn't see this Bloodfiend herself. She did see her animated corpses. She wasn't even a major part of this hunt, as she was relatively inexperienced as the Distortion detective. She also wasn't as professional. Elena eluded her. Then again, not many encountered the Blood Red Knight and lived to speak of it. In the end, Roland and Angelica of Charles' office took her out. But it would prove to be a temporary setback. After that, Moses studied Bloodfiends during her off hours. And so she either repelled or resolved them. She saw each as those that possessed formidable power. Some had rationality and were more cunning and intelligent with what they did, until they were cornered and they resorted to strength out of desperation. Others didn't, and had explosive physical strength and tenacity, and a strong bloodthirst. Then again, all Bloodfiends were driven by a vampiric thirst. They craved blood, and not for sating hunger. It was desire crystallized. Blood was currency to them, a purpose unto itself to them, much as humans can be predatory towards money. They will do anything to consume it. Moses told Larierre, the Bloodfiend owner of the Hotel Larierre, that she worries that what she might have, other than ways to claim more blood. Larierre hinted that it might be the case, but since the Pillar of Light, during the White Night and Dark Days, happened, their family has been under threat like no other. She explained to Moses that they form a community, to live long and quiet lives as veins stretch into the night, to live peacefully in the city without drawing attention to themselves from fixers that might be hired to kill them, along with vengeful syndicate members. Unfortunately, there are those that ruin that, like Elena. Well, we know what happened to her, don't we? After the light was released, there was a colony outside of their control, and Moses understood this to be new Bloodfiends, which Larierre confirmed. They were newborns that were either unaware of the rules established by the older Bloodfiends, or they just didn't care. They also lacked control over their powers. Moses was surprised at Bloodfiends having rules to endorse trapping people in hotels to drain them of blood. Now, I theorized in the Library of Ruina lore series, certainly where it's relevant to speak of Elena, the Blood Red Knight, that the smarter and more in control of themselves Bloodfiends had legitimate fronts to get blood out of humans without being detected. Such as, well, one example I thought of was blood donation clinics for medical purposes, where they send some of the blood to where it's needed in order to prevent suspicion from being aroused. As for Larierre, Those that she drains won't even remember what happened the next day. She doesn't drain them dry. Where until the white nights and dark days, she and her kind had moderated their thirst. After, their purity and pedigree, such as that of the elders, was tested. This confused Moses concerning purity and pedigree. When it came to distortions, Larierre found that amusing. From one who saw the twisted minds of people. This surprised Moses that Larierre knew that she could see distortions, and she was there. It turned out that a good friend of hers informed her. Larierre, that term friend is debatable. And yes, Moses figured out that Han Hee-jun leaked that information. Larierre considered him more supportive than Moses might think. Yeah, that's debatable. Keeping her in the dark, leaving out the fact that he was DS lapdog. Indirectly manipulating them to go in a particular direction. I mean, why not just tell them? Now, with a friend like him, enemies are about as redundant as an enlarged appendix. Moses told her that the distortion was a disease of the mind made physical. Yeah. It would seem that interrupting the light caused that disease of the mind to become physical reality. Essentially making things worse. Where they followed a set of patterns and were especially plain. The Bloodfiend distortion wasn't the trickiest to handle. Larierre considered her unique as she was part of the bloodline. Their ichor was linked from the moment that they received blood from a mansion. This formed a lineage, where they were living in the shadows long before the white nights and dark days. Yeah, the Bloodfiend distortion predated that. Elena was a distortion along with the others. But all the White Nights and Dark Days did was make more Bloodfiends appear. And since they're fighting for their lives, well, let's just say that their enemy was unaltered humans, regardless of intention, where fixers and syndicates would encounter them occasionally. The rules exist for survival, where they settled in each nest and districts, to prevent intrusion from other territories, where balance was established by killing other Bloodfiends to keep the population low enough to avoid too much attention from those that might want them dead. Moses figured out that there were like the 25 elders, one in each district. Well, except District 1, by that implication, as clearly the head doesn't tolerate Bloodfiends that close to their base of operations. Yeah, don't want them trying to take over. Larierre's position was more recently threatened by one of the newborns threatening that balance. She conceded that Elena the Blood Red Knight was an example of how fragile that balance was, seeing her as an embodiment of violence. Larierre failed to calm her, and she was worrying that more incidents like her might occur. Moses asked if her employees knew that she was a Bloodfiend. Only Ruth was aware. As for the menace that was threatening her seat, it was Rusk, the fixer hired by the hotel. Clearly, Larierre was aware of the expression, "keep your friends close and your enemies even closer." Rusk was trying to remove her and take her throne for himself. Moses couldn't see that, as she only saw an ordinary level of distortion from him. Bloodfiends had red eyes, but that didn't automatically make him a Bloodfiend. Well, Carmen had red eyes, and as far as I'm aware, she wasn't a Bloodfiend. That, and there were, augmentation procedures of the eye were common. Largely for it assisted in combat. Moses can tell the difference, as the red hue of the eye becomes deeper, in proportion to the bloodthirst. They also exude a, specific scent. Yeah, they had bloodshot eyes. As for Rusk's eyes, they didn't show that. And Larierre told her that he only revealed that in his sleep, which was why she couldn't detect it. Moses asked why she didn't strike him when he was awake. Larierre didn't see that as wise, as that would trigger his self-preservation instincts and would awaken his inner beast. Direct involvement would only make things worse and cause what she was trying to prevent, potentially. As for what's stopping Rusk from killing her, it's because he isn't aware yet. He doesn't even know that she's there or that she's in charge. Larierre didn't want Moses to be violent. She wanted her to take Rusk with her. Moses was confused by how reluctant she was to spill blood, as she clearly loved to feast on it. Apparently Rusk and his fixers were all Bloodfiends, although he's not aware. And he also turned his subordinates into Bloodfiends in their sleep. Yeah. Bloodfiend fixers in a combat situation would be able to get blood from their victims and destroy the evidence to stay under the scanning equipment. Either that or the eye would detect it and simply just not care. They're doing their jobs. Who cares how they do it, as long as it doesn't threaten their power base? Or more specifically, the head's power base. And after telling her that, Larierre decided to leave the rest to Moses. Larierre then waved her hand, and then Moses was sucked out of the room and ejected into the corridor. And at this point, Moses was now aware of how organized the Bloodfiends really were. She would need to reevaluate them. But before that, she had a decision before her. Neutralize Rusk or take down Larierre. She would need to discuss this with Ezra and Vesper, assuming that they weren't fed upon. Okay, that's where the Distortion Detective ends. For now, at least. At least according to one source, which spoke of it in July 2021. Apparently, it was good enough for the source of this to be cancelled, as it's going to be made into a game developed after Limbus Company, which is a game set after Library of Ruina. So we're likely to be in for a long wait to find out how this story is concluded. Although at some point, they're likely to have an encounter with the 8 o'clock circus, and then interviewing the Wedge office, after the minions of Oswald were largely slaughtered. Will Moses' office appear in Limbus Company? How will the rest of the story of Moses the Distortion Detective go? And how will the game based on what I've just covered work? However, Project Moon shows one thing among others: that South Korea does grimdark well. I'm considering doing a lore breakdown on the Wonderlab comic series, which is a parallel story of Lobotomy Corporation. Think that's a good idea, or should I just wait for the next game? Well, it was good while it lasted. Well, at least until the Distortion Detective game comes out, if it does. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!